On certain afternoons in the high desert, the light turns everything to memory. It was that kind of afternoon when Eleanor pushed open the door of the little thrift store on the edge of town. The sign above it read, "Second Chance Finds," the red paint faded by years of sun and wind. A bell gave a soft, tired jingle as she stepped inside. Dust motes hung in the air like slow drifting snow. Shelves leaned a little to one side, stacked with chipped mugs, old paperbacks, and picture frames that had forgotten whose faces they once held. Somewhere near the back, a radio played a song from another decade, barely loud enough to make out the tune. Eleanor paused just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust. She slipped a hand into the pocket of her coat and quietly counted the coins there with her thumb. 20, 30, 40 cents. Enough for a small treat, maybe, not much more. Hazel, the owner, gave her a nod from behind the counter. No big greeting. Just the kind of simple kindness people in small towns share when they've seen each other through a lot of years and a lot of winters. Eleanor nodded back and moved slowly between the aisles. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Some days, she came here just to be around other people's stories. An old sewing machine, a set of travel mugs from a road trip someone once took, a jacket with a name stitched inside the collar. All these little pieces of loyalty and love put on a shelf and given a price. At the very bottom of a wobbly display, half hidden behind a line of mismatched coffee cups, she saw it. A bobcat. Not a real one, of course. A small statue, bronze gone soft with age. The bobcat was poised mid-step on a rough little base that looked like stone. One front paw hovered, as if it had just heard something in the scrub. The ears were pricked, the muscles in its shoulders tight, tail low, eyes set on some invisible horizon only it could see. Eleanor bent down with a small grunt, knees complaining, and reached for it. It was heavier than it looked, solid and cool against her palm. For a moment, standing there in the smell of old books and worn denim, the rest of the store dissolved. It was just her and this frozen wild creature, caught forever in a moment of listening. She turned it over to look for a price. On a little piece of yellowing tape, someone had written in shaky blue ink, 20 cents. She checked again just to be sure she wasn't misreading it. The bobcat stared back at her, unbothered by the number stuck to its belly. Out beyond town, real bobcats moved through the canyons and dry washes, quiet and invisible. Here, one of them had been turned into an object and priced lower than a paperback novel. Eleanor straightened slowly, the statue still in her hand. She walked up to the counter and held it out. "Hazel, this says 20 cents. Is that right?" Hazel pulled her glasses down from where they rested on top of her head, squinted and smiled. "Looks about right." Came in a box of knickknacks from that estate sale on Canyon Road. No one's looked twice at it all week. "You like bobcats?" "I'm not sure yet," Eleanor answered, surprised by her own honesty. "But it feels real somehow." Hazel shrugged, friendly. "Then it's your lucky day." The register drawer slid open with a soft clatter. Eleanor picked out 2 dimes from her pocket, feeling the ridges under her thumb before letting them go. 20 cents. About what she'd once spent on a candy bar after counseling sessions, when the day had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. Now, it bought her a small wild thing in bronze. As she stepped back out into the bright desert light, the wind brushed her face dry and cool. Somewhere beyond the strip of old shops, brown hills rose, dotted with sage and low pine. She'd never seen a real bobcat on those slopes, but she'd seen tracks once, like soft punctuation marks in the dust. Eleanor walked slowly to her car, feeling the weight of the statue against her hip through the fabric of the bag. There was something soulful, as if a quiet space inside her had heard a knock. Later, at home, she cleared off a small table by the front window. There was a ring of dust where a lamp used to sit. She wiped it with the sleeve of her sweater, then set the bobcat down facing outward, as if it were watching the street, keeping its own kind of watch. The light from the setting sun slid across its back, turning the bronze warm. If you've ever brought something home from a place like that, you might know the feeling. It isn't really about the object. It's about the moment. The way your chest lifts just enough to let a little more air in. The way your emotions shift, almost imperceptibly, from grey to the faintest hint of color. For Eleanor, this wasn't just a decoration. It was company. A small guardian, a reminder that even here, in a quiet house where the radio stayed off most days and the phone didn't ring much, there was still a connection to the wildness beyond her front door, to something alive, even if this version of it was cast in metal. And the moral part of this story, the heartwarming part, hasn't shown itself yet. It was hiding just beneath the surface, like a bobcat crouched under sagebrush, waiting. Because what Eleanor didn't know, standing in that window light, was that this 20-cent statue had a history of its own. The sculptor who made it, the real bobcat whose muscles had inspired those lines, the collector's world that would later call it rare and valuable, and offer it a number that didn't quite make sense to a woman counting coins at the checkout. Someday soon, a wildlife appraiser would knock on her door, look closely at that small feline shape, and calmly say words that would make her stomach twist. "Mrs. Price, if this piece is what I think it is, I can find a buyer willing to pay $50,000. $50,000. For the same statue she had picked up off a dusty shelf for 20 cents. But that part of the tale belongs to the next chapter. For now, we stay with this quieter moment. A woman in a small desert town placing a bobcat statue in a shaft of evening light, letting herself feel that tiny, risky opening in her chest. That first fragile step toward letting something, anything, into her life again. As you listen, you might be thinking of your own 20-cent thing. The simple object, or maybe the animal that arrived when you were loneliest. The one that didn't look like much from the outside, but somehow held your hand through a hard season. If you have something like that, even a memory, you might pause for a breath here. Just notice it. That's where this inspirational story really begins. Not with the money, not with a big decision, but with a small, almost accidental yes. And in the next part of this moral story, we'll step back in time with Eleanor, into the grief and the long, quiet days that made her pick up that bobcat in the first place. So we can understand why 20 cents was never the real price she paid. Before the bobcats, the other kind. Before she retired, most days ended with her dropping her bag by the kitchen table and saying, out of habit, "You would not believe the day I just had," even if the room was empty. For 35 years, she'd worked as a school counselor, listening to teenagers talk about heartbreak, panic, and family storms. She'd told them that feelings come in waves, that nothing stays the same forever. It had been easy to say those words when she went home to a house where the lights were on and somebody was waiting. After Thomas was gone, that house felt like a stage after the play had ended. Same furniture, same walls, no lines left to say. There was a piano in the corner of the living room. Not a fancy one, just an old upright that had followed them through 3 moves and 2 kids. In the evenings, he used to sit there and work his way through the same handful of songs. Some nights, it was hymns from his childhood. Some nights, a bit of jazz he'd never quite mastered. Sometimes he'd miss a chord and laugh, and she would laugh too, even if she'd heard the same mistake 100 times. If you've had someone like that, you know there's a particular sound to shared laughter in a small room. It hangs in the air a little longer than any other sound. The last time she remembered the piano lid being open was the week before his final hospital stay. He'd been too tired to play more than a few bars. After he died, the visiting nurse folded up the rental bed in the living room, the oxygen tank was picked up, and the house emptied itself of medical equipment, the way a tide drags things quietly back out to sea. One afternoon, she walked past the piano and, for no particular reason, put the lid down. The thud was soft. Final. She didn't open it again. Grief, if you asked her, didn't feel like an emotion. It felt like a texture in the air. Mornings were the worst. She would stand at the kitchen sink, fingers wrapped around a mug that had belonged to him, and the time between the kettle boiling and the tea cooling felt stretched out. Hours that used to be filled with kids at school, teachers dropping by her office with quick questions, small emergencies that made the day rush by. All that was gone. Now the clock over the stove was loud. The refrigerator hum was loud. The absence was loud. Money, too, had become its own kind of quiet humiliation. She had enough to get by. Social security, a small pension, and the modest savings they'd built together. But enough to get by is not the same as not worrying. There was a day at the mechanic. Her sedan had a stubborn rattle and a glowing warning light that had been on for weeks. The young man at the service desk was polite, patient as he walked her through the list of what needed attention. Safety items, recommended items, things that could wait a bit, but not too long. He flipped the clipboard around so she could see the estimate. The top number made her stomach twist. She tried to keep her voice light as she asked, "If this were your car and your mother's budget, what would you fix today?" He smiled, circled the brakes and the tires, and crossed off the rest. "This will keep you safe," he said. "We can deal with the other stuff later." She nodded, grateful and a little embarrassed that she had needed to ask. At home, those decisions showed up in smaller ways. The furnace in the basement was older than some of her former students' children. On cold desert nights, she resisted the urge to nudge the thermostat up. Instead, she put on an extra pair of socks, added another blanket to the bed, and told herself it wasn't so bad. The air in the house carried a faint chill right through to spring. Her daughter, Lauren, called from the city every Sunday. The conversations were loving, but carried their own kind of pressure. "Mom, have you thought any more about moving closer to us?" Lauren would ask. "There are some really nice communities. They've got activities, they've got people your age. You wouldn't have to worry about the house or the yard or the furnace." People your age. It wasn't meant unkindly, but the phrase landed heavily. As if there was a rule book somewhere that said what someone her age should want, should do, should give up. There was care in the suggestion, and love, and a kind of loyalty. But there was also the quiet sting of feeling like her life was being gently folded up and put away, like an old sweater. She tried to explain once. "I'm not a plant you can just repot," she said. "This place, it's where I remember him. It's where I remember myself." On the other end of the line, there was a pause. "I just don't want you to be lonely," her daughter said, voice tight. "I already am," Eleanor wanted to answer. But that's not something a new zip code can fix. Instead, she just said, "I know," and changed the subject. Some evenings, when the sun was sliding down behind the hills, she lit a single candle on the kitchen table. It started as a way to make the room feel less empty. After a while, it became something else. She'd sit in the dim light, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and whisper a few words to the air. She didn't call it a prayer. She didn't call it anything. Just a soft, "If anyone's listening, help me find a reason. Help me remember how to feel happy without feeling guilty about it." It wasn't that there was no love in her life. Her children loved her. Old colleagues still sent holiday cards. Neighbors waved when she went out to check the mail. There was loyalty there and kindness. But in the day-to-day, the house itself felt like it had forgotten how to hold laughter. This is where our moral story really begins. Long before the wildlife appraiser and the big number, with a woman who had given a lifetime of care to other people's children, now walking through her own rooms like a guest in a museum of her past. If you've ever been in that kind of season, the aftermath of a great loss, the long middle where every day looks the same, you know how heavy the hours can feel, how your emotions flatten out, how even inspirational stories and heartwarming stories on TV can slide past you, because they're about other people's miracles. The bobcat statue, the one priced at 20 cents, didn't arrive in a life filled with noise and light. It arrived at this. To a house where the piano was shut, the heat was turned down, and the phone was carefully answered with a cheerful voice that didn't quite match the eyes in the mirror. And maybe that's why it mattered so much. Because when something wild, even in bronze, walks into a life that quiet, it doesn't have to roar to make a difference. It just has to be there, watching, waiting, reminding you that somewhere out beyond your driveway, real bobcats move through the desert with their own quiet confidence, not asking anyone's permission to exist. In the next part of this story, we'll see what happens when that little statue takes its place by Eleanor's window, and how the smallest routine, a fingertip brushing bronze each morning, can start to turn a house back into a home. For now, if any of this feels familiar, the shut piano, the careful thermostat, the well-meant suggestions from people who love you, you might take a breath and simply acknowledge it. You've carried a lot. Your story has weight. And sometimes, the first act of kindness you can offer yourself is just to say, yes, this is where I am, before anything changes at all. The bobcat came home wrapped in an old scarf at the bottom of Eleanor's tote bag. It rode beside a can of soup and a loaf of discount bread, jostling gently with each turn of the wheel as she drove back through town. Outside the windshield, the high desert hills sat in their usual calm, the color of faded sage and dry earth. Somewhere out there, real bobcats were beginning their dusk patrol, slipping between rocks and creosote bushes as the light softened. Inside the car, the only sound was the heater fan and the faint rattle in the dashboard Eleanor kept meaning to have checked. When she pulled into her driveway, she sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. Long habit. Finish the drive. Take a breath. Put the "I'm fine" expression back on for the neighbors, even if no one was watching. Then she reached into the tote and cupped her hand around the statue before lifting it. The metal was still cool from the store, solid in her palm. It surprised her how reassuring that weight felt. In the kitchen, she unpacked the groceries in their usual order. Chans lined up in the pantry, bread in the bread box, milk in the fridge. When the counter was cleared, the bobcat remained, sitting in the middle of the laminate like it didn't quite belong to this decade or this room. She turned slowly, looking for a place that felt right. The little table by the front window caught her eye, the one that had once held a lamp and a bowl of keys, back when people were always coming and going. Lately, it had become a landing spot for unopened mail and a pair of reading glasses she kept misplacing. Eleanor gathered the scattered envelopes into a neat stack, set the glasses on top, and wiped the table with the sleeve of her sweater. A pale ring of dust marked where something round had once sat for years. She ran her fingers over it, then placed the bobcat in that circle, like she was returning a guardian to its watch. She turned it so it faced outward toward the street, as if it were watching the neighborhood. Out beyond the houses, past the last row of mailboxes, the hills rose in a slow, steady line. From this angle, you couldn't see them, but she knew they were there. The statue seemed to know too. The evening sun slid in low, turning the room a soft gold. It caught the bronze along the bobcat's back, making its muscles look almost warm. The curve of its spine, the tension in that lifted paw, the way the ears were angled forward, it all felt strangely alive. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor didn't rush to turn on the TV for background noise. She just stood there, hands folded loosely, watching the way the light and shadow moved across the statue's face. It was a small moment, nothing dramatic, no choir of angels. Just a widow in a quiet house, looking at a piece of metal and feeling something inside her chest shift half an inch toward open. Over the next few days, the bobcat slipped into her routine, as if it had been there all along. Each morning she shuffled into the living room with her first cup of coffee. Before she even realized she was doing it, she would pause at the window table, tap the statue lightly on the head with one finger, and say, "Morning, you," under her breath. She didn't mean to talk to it. The words simply showed up, like a reflex from a time when someone was there to greet. The statue never answered, of course. But she found herself comforted by its steady presence. In a house that had lost so much motion and noise, there was now this one form that never changed its posture, never turned away, never asked her to hurry up or slow down, just watched. The candle on the kitchen table became part of the ritual too. At dusk, when the desert sky went from hard blue to soft purple, she lit it the way she always had. But now, instead of staring at the flame and the empty chair across from her, she would glance toward the bobcat's silhouette in the next room. Sometimes she even moved the candle to the little table for a while, setting it just far enough away that the heat wouldn't damage the metal. The flame flickered in the statue's eyes, giving them a quiet, soulful shine. "If anyone's listening," she'd say softly, the way she had before, "thank you for this." For something to look at that isn't a bill or a screen. On a Saturday, when the wind was too sharp for walking, she opened a drawer looking for a notepad and found an old spiral-bound sketchbook instead. The cover was bent, pages slightly yellowed. She'd bought it years ago, in one of those hopeful moments when she thought she might try painting or drawing. When life slowed down. Life had slowed, all right. The sketchbook had waited. She carried it to the table and sat down opposite the bobcat. For a long moment, she just stared at the blank page. Then she picked up a pencil. Her hand felt clumsy at first, fingers a little stiff, but as she started to trace the line of the bobcat's back, the angle of the head, something in her breathing changed. The long, restless inhale-exhale she'd been living with softened. Time, which had stretched endlessly during those long afternoons, suddenly began to gather itself into minutes that had shape. She wasn't trying to make a masterpiece. She wasn't even sure she remembered how to shade properly. She simply let the pencil follow what her eyes saw. The strong curve of the shoulder, the small hollow above the hip, the way the front paw hovered, ready but patient. When the phone rang, she jumped. It was Lauren, cheerful and busy as always, asking about the weather, the car, and whether the furnace was behaving. Eleanor, she went straight back to the table, back to the lines she'd started, back to the small happiness of making something exist where there had been nothing. This is where the story becomes something more than a simple find at a thrift store. A bobcat statue bought for 20 cents was slowly becoming a kind of anchor, a daily reminder that her hands could still create, that her emotions weren't frozen forever, that her home could hold more than just grief. From the outside, nothing had changed. No one driving by her house would have guessed that the woman inside was slowly turning toward life again because of a piece of cast metal. But on the inside, the temperature had shifted a degree. It's easy, when you hear the words inspirational story or heartwarming stories, to picture big, grand gestures, rescues, miracles, fireworks of happiness. But often, the healing that matters most begins like this. A fingertip on bronze in the quiet of a Tuesday morning. A sketch on a blank page, a small, steady presence that doesn't leave when the day gets hard. You might have something like that in your own life. A photo on the dresser, a dog that sighs at your feet, a plant you water even when you don't feel like taking care of yourself. It doesn't have to be rare or expensive to be your guardian. If you'd like, you can take a moment right now to notice whatever that is. Just name it silently. Let yourself feel the tiny thaw that comes from realizing you're not completely alone in the room. Because in Eleanor's case, that quiet companionship was about to draw attention from a very different world. A world of galleries and collectors and people who measure value in numbers, not in the way your heart loosens when you walk past a window. In the next part of this moral story, a wildlife appraiser will step into Eleanor's living room, look at that same small bobcat, and offer a price she never imagined hearing. And the question will shift from, why does this make me feel less lonely, to, what is this really worth, and what am I willing to trade for it? Some turning points in life don't arrive with trumpets. They arrive with a knock at the door on an ordinary afternoon. It was late morning when Eleanor's phone rang. Hazel's name lit up the screen. "I hope I'm not bothering you," Hazel said. "There's a wildlife art event in town this week." A man came into the shop asking if I'd seen any bobcat sculptures lately. I told him about the one you bought for 20 cents. He perks right up. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the phone. "He wanted to know where it ended up," Hazel went on. "I didn't give him your address, but I did give him your number." He said his name is Graham Porter, wildlife appraiser. Seemed decent. I thought you might at least want to hear what he had to say. Eleanor thanked her and hung up, heart thudding faster than it needed to for a 68-year-old woman standing in her kitchen. a wildlife appraiser, for her little bronze bobcat. She looked over at the table by the window. The statue sat in its usual place, watching the street, unbothered by any of this. The next day, Graham called. His voice was measured, careful. "Mrs. Price, I specialize in Western wildlife art," he explained. "Your friend mentioned a small bronze bobcat you purchased at Second Chance Finds. Would you be open to my taking a quick look? No pressure, I'm just curious." Eleanor almost said no. The statue had become something private, almost sacred. But curiosity nudged her. And if she was honest, so did the word specialize. It had been a long time since anyone used that word around anything she owned. They agreed on Thursday afternoon. When the day came, she did something she hadn't done since before the funeral. She wiped down the baseboards. She straightened the cushions. She even opened the curtains a little wider to let in more light. It wasn't for him, really. It was for herself. A small act of loyalty to the life she was still living. At 2 o'clock sharp, there was a knock. She let Graham in and led him to the front room. He didn't rush, didn't make big noises about anything. He simply walked over to the little table by the window and stopped. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. He leaned in, studying the bobcat the way a naturalist studies tracks in sand. He didn't touch it right away. His eyes moved over the curve of its back, the set of the jaw, the tension in that lifted paw. Then he crouched a little, looking at it from the side, then from below. "May I?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. He lifted the statue in both hands, the way you lift something breakable, even when it's metal. He turned it carefully, checking the underside of the base, the edge along the back leg. When he found the faint impression of a signature, almost erased by time, he drew in a small breath. "Well," he said softly, "would you look at that?" He carried it over to the dining table, set it gently on a folded dish towel, and took a small magnifier from his pocket. Eleanor watched his hands, the practiced way he moved, the respect in his touch. "Mrs. Price," he said after a moment, "have you ever heard of a sculptor named Callum Reyes?" She shook her head. "Reyes was a wildlife artist," Graham explained, active in the 60s and 70s, very reclusive. He lived out near the National Forest for years. Spent more time with animals than with people, by all accounts. There was a hint of a smile in his voice at that. He was especially known for his work on bobcats. Not many pieces, but the ones he did. He gestured toward her statue. He captured them as they really are. Not cute, not monstrous. Just themselves. He stepped aside so she could see the tiny, worn letters along the base. Faint, but there. "In my field," he went on, "Reyes is something of a legend. Most of his smaller bronzes ended up in private collections. They don't come up on the market often. When they do, collectors pay attention." Eleanor swallowed. The room felt a little smaller. "I believe," he said, "that this is an early Reyes bobcat, possibly modeled after a real female he followed for several seasons. A cat the locals once called Sienna, I think. I'll want to confirm with some colleagues, of course, but the proportions, the patina, the signature, they all line up." He let the words settle before adding the next part. "If I'm right, Mrs. Price, there are collectors I work with who would be willing to pay in the ballpark of $50,000 for this piece." The silence that followed wasn't like the silence after the funeral. It wasn't empty. It was full. Too full. 50,000. She'd expected maybe a few hundred, if that. Enough to fix the rattle in the car, maybe. Not this. Not a number that could replace the furnace, patch the roof, clear some medical bills, and still leave something for savings. She felt the old counselor in her brain trying to stay calm, to observe. "You're having a big reaction, Eleanor. That's understandable." But her body told the truth. A little tremor in her fingertips, a lightness in her chest that wasn't joy exactly, more like fear wearing a different coat. She looked past him at the window. The hills sat in their usual quiet, holding their usual secrets. Somewhere out there, real bobcats walked invisible paths along the ridges. No idea that a cast version of their kind had just been mapped onto a dollar amount. Graham, you found this statue. You loved it before you knew a thing about its signature. That matters. It's not just an asset to you. It's companionship. He hesitated, then added, "At our age, though, it's hard to ignore what that kind of money could do. Financial safety, repairs, medical costs, travel if you want. I would be happy to represent you, should you decide to sell. You'd never have to worry about the details. At our age." There it was again, the phrase that carried both concern and an invisible script. It was meant kindly, Eleanor knew that, but it brushed against something raw in her, the part of her that resisted the idea that her story's main theme now should be safety, not growth, security, not curiosity, practicality, not love. She thought about turning the heat up in winter without thinking twice, about not holding her breath when the car made a new noise, about saying yes, just once, if Lauren invited her on a trip instead of saying, "Maybe next year, honey." She also thought about the mornings when she walked past that window table and tapped the bobcat's head. The way drawing it had made the hours feel less hollow. The strange comfort she felt knowing something in her house was always looking out, even if it was only metal. The statue sat between them now on the towel, silent and self-contained. It didn't care about appraisals or bank accounts. It didn't know it had been priced at 20 cents in a thrift store. It didn't know it had just been offered $50,000. To the bobcat, there had only ever been one job. Be a bobcat. Listen. Watch. Hold that wild stillness. If you've ever had something in your life suddenly given a price, a family heirloom, a ring, even a pet insurance quote, you might know this feeling. The strange dissonance between what something means to your emotions, to your soul, and what the world says it's worth. That's where Eleanor stood, in that small desert living room, between those two numbers, 20 cents and 50,000. Between the safety she'd been told to want and the quiet happiness she'd just begun to allow. She didn't give Graham an answer that day. Instead, she thanked him, promised to think about it, and walked him to the door. He handed her a card, name, number, neat black print, and said, "Take your time. This is your story." When the door closed, the house felt oddly loud. The clock over the stove ticked like a metronome. The refrigerator hummed. Out by the window, the bobcat waited. Exactly as before. Eleanor picked it up with both hands and held it against her chest for a moment, feeling the cold metal through her sweater. Then she set it back down in its spot, turned it once toward the hills she could not see, and whispered, "What am I supposed to do with you now?" In the next part of this inspirational story, that question will lead her beyond her own front door, to a wildlife rehab center, to the real lives behind bronze statues, and to a deeper understanding of what value really means when love and loyalty enter the equation. For now, maybe you can think of something in your own life that can't be measured only in dollars. A dog who saw you through chemo, a quilt your mother stitched by hand, a simple object that holds your heart. Just noticing that difference, the gap between price and meaning, is its own kind of quiet, moral story worth listening to. Before Eleanor made any decision about $50,000, she needed to understand who and what had really come into her life. So on a clear, sharp morning a few days after Graham's visit, she found herself driving past the last row of houses, out toward the edge of town. The road narrowed, the pavement giving way to hard-packed dirt. A hand-painted wooden sign appeared on the right, a little crooked in the soil. High Desert Wildlife Care, by appointment only. She turned in. The parking lot was just a flattened patch of earth with a few faded lines painted on it. A chain-link fence surrounded a cluster of low buildings and enclosures. From the car, she could hear a thin chorus of sounds. A hawk's sharp call, the soft clank of metal bowls, a dog barking once and then quieting. Inside the small office, the air smelled faintly of coffee, hay, and something clean but unmistakably animal. A woman at the desk greeted her with the tired, bright warmth of someone who spends most of their energy on others. "You must be Eleanor," she said. "I'm Dana. Hazel called and told me a little about your statue, and about you." Eleanor smiled, a little shy. "I thought if this bobcat was based on a real one, I'd like to know something about her. I don't know why exactly, it just feels important." "It is important," Donna said. "Come on, I'll show you around." They stepped through a door into the rehab area. The light changed, softer, filtered through mesh and shade cloth. Cages lined one wall, each with a handwritten tag. A red-tailed hawk with a bandaged wing watched them from a perch. In another enclosure, a fox with an injured leg lay quietly on a blanket, eyes following their movement without fear or friendliness yet. Just assessing. "We take in whoever needs us," Donna said. "Raptors hit by cars, coyotes caught in fencing, occasionally a bobcat if somebody's been careless with poison, or if a kitten is orphaned. We patch them up, give them time, and if we can, we send them back where they belong." They stopped in front of a large outdoor pen, sturdy fencing wrapped in privacy fabric. Inside, a lean shape moved along the back wall. Tawny fur, darker spots, tufted ears. A bobcat. It wasn't close enough to see clearly, but the outline was unmistakable. Smooth, low, powerful. It disappeared behind a wooden shelter, then reappeared on a raised platform, sitting with its back to them, gaze fixed on the distant hills. "This one's called Cedar," Donna said quietly. "Came in after being hit on the highway. Broken leg, head trauma. He's doing better. If all goes well, we'll release him back up near the ridge this spring." Eleanor watched the cat's steady profile, the way the head moved slightly, scanning, the same listening posture as the bronze in her living room. But this one breathed. This one blinked. This one had felt pain, hunger, fear. "What about—" She hesitated, feeling oddly nervous. "Graham mentioned a real bobcat, the one the sculptor followed? Sienna?" Dana's face softened. "Ah, Sienna. That was years ago, before my time. But her photo's up in the education room. Come on." They stepped into a small classroom with folding chairs and an old whiteboard. On the far wall, a corkboard held laminated pictures, releases, rehab stories, school visits. In the center was a black and white photograph, slightly curled at the edges. A man in a work shirt stood beside a chain-link enclosure, inside a bobcat perched on a branch, head turned toward the camera with that same alert patience Eleanor knew so well. Muscles defined, one front paw lifted lightly off the bark. Underneath, someone had written in careful letters, "Sienna, 1972. Rehabilitated and released. Sculptor in residence, C. Reyes." Eleanor stepped closer. The cat's eyes, even in the faded photo, had a kind of presence that made the hairs on her arms rise. "Reyes stayed in a little cabin out back for a while," Dana explained. "Helped with feeding, cleaning, sketched all the time. They say he followed Sienna long after she was released. Not to tame her, just to learn, to respect her. That bobcat behind your bronze, that was real life. A wild, complicated, brave little life." Eleanor let that sink in. The statue on her table had always felt soulful to her, even before she knew why. Now she could see the thread. From an orphaned kitten in a pen, to a patient artist with a sketchbook, to a bronze that had somehow survived decades, estate sales, and a thrift store shelf. And then, somehow, to her. "This is—" She searched for the right word. "A lot." Dana nodded. "Value gets funny when stories are involved. People hear rare artist and limited bronze and think money. I hear Sienna and think of the nights someone sat out here in the cold, watching a half-wild cat learn to trust enough to eat in front of him." They moved on through the center. In the medical room, stainless steel tables held neatly arranged instruments. On a heating pad lay a juvenile owl with gauze around one wing. Its eyes were enormous, both suspicious and curious. Near the back door, an older man with a cane was folding clean towels into careful stacks. He looked up and smiled. "This is Harold," Dana said. "He's one of our most loyal volunteers. Does laundry, dishes, whatever we need." Harold chuckled. "I'm mostly here to be bossed around by the staff," he said, "and to feel useful." "Do you have animals at home?" Eleanor asked. He shook his head. "No pets allowed in my building, and I'm not up for long hikes anymore. But this place," he gestured around, "this is how I get my animal time. I sponsor one of the birds too, a redtail named Ruby. Costs less than cable, means more." His words settled gently into the room. Love for animals didn't have to look like a dog on your couch or a cat on your bed. Sometimes loyalty looked like folded towels, scrubbed bowls, and a check written once a month on a fixed income. As they walked back outside, a young couple came in, their little boy in tow. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at a poster of a coyote. "Can we see the dangerous ones?" he asked. Dana crouched down to his level. "Some animals here were hurt by people who didn't understand them," she said kindly. "They're not as dangerous as they're scared. Like you might be if you woke up in a strange place with a broken leg. Our job is to help them heal and get back home. They're not monsters. They're neighbors." Eleanor watched the boy's face soften. A tiny shift. A new story about wildlife taking root where fear had been. As they finished the tour, she found herself circling back to the same quiet question. Why was one bobcat statue worth $50,000, while the living animals here had to fight for every dollar of funding? For donated meat, for bandages, for a new enclosure. "Does it ever bother you," she asked Donna, "that people will spend so much on art of animals, but you have to beg for supplies to help the real ones?" Donna smiled, but there was a tired edge to it. "Every day," she admitted. "But I've learned to see it another way. If a painting or a statue can open a heart, maybe that heart will open a wallet, or a volunteer schedule, or a mind that votes for better protections. The art is a doorway. The animals are the reason." They stopped one last time by Cedar's enclosure. The bobcat had moved closer to the front now, watching them with those pale, steady eyes. For a moment, his gaze met Eleanor's. Something passed between them. Not magic, just recognition. Two living creatures, both a little scarred, both still here. "Thank you," she said softly, not sure if she was talking to the cat, to Dana, to Sienna's memory, or to something larger that had woven their paths together. On the drive home, the hills looked different. Not because they had changed, but because she now knew more of what moved, unseen, along their ridges. Bobcats, coyotes. Hawks are catching the last light of day on their wings. Lives are going on, indifferent to appraisals, quietly priceless. Back in her living room, the bronze bobcat waited on the table. She set her car keys down and walked straight to it, resting her hand on its back the way she might on a sleeping animal. "You were never just metal," she whispered. "You were a story the whole time." In the next part of this heartwarming story, that realization will follow her into a winter storm, a missing statue, and a night when old grief and new fear collide. And we'll see what happens when the thing that helped you heal suddenly disappears. For now, if you're able, you might take a moment to think about the animals you'll never meet. The ones in your local woods, your city sky, or a rescue center not far from you. Maybe say a quiet thank you for them. Their lives run alongside ours, unseen but important, and recognizing that is its own small, soulful act of kindness. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday. The kind of winter storm the desert gets when it decides to remind everyone that it can still be harsh. By late afternoon, the sky over the hills had turned the color of steel wool. Wind pushed against the windows in long, low gusts. Fine snow began to fall, then thickened, blurring the line where town ended and open land began. Inside Eleanor's house, it was early enough in the evening that she hadn't turned on many lights. The living room was mostly lit by the glow from the TV, and the faint silver coming through the front window. On the little table by that window, the bronze bobcat stood where it always stood, still and sure, ears pointed toward the invisible ridges outside. Eleanor watched the weather report with half her attention. The other half was on the familiar ritual, her hand reaching out, fingertips brushing the bobcat's head as she walked past to the kitchen. A small tap for luck. Or loyalty. Or maybe just a habit now. "Looks like you'll have company out there tonight," she murmured, glancing at the pale snow beyond the glass. Real bobcats, real trouble. The wind picked up. A branch scraped against the siding with a sound that made her shoulders tighten. She turned up the volume a notch to drown out the scrape, then decided against it. There was something honest about hearing the storm when you lived alone. It made you feel less like the only one awake. She checked the thermostat, hesitated, and nudged it up 1 degree. Kindness to herself, just this once. The furnace rumbled to life in the basement with a tired sigh. As the evening went on, the snow came harder. The TV flickered once, then again. Somewhere, a transformer protested. Eleanor clicked the set off, preferring the storm's soundtrack to the anxious chatter of the news. She lit a candle on the coffee table, the same way she always did, and let her eyes wander to the silhouette of the bobcat at the window. Its outline was sharp against the murky light. Guardian, witness, small, soul-deep comfort. When she finally went to bed, the wind was still howling against the house. She paused, as she always did, at the window table, fingers on bronze. A whispered, "Good night, you," that surprised her only a little now. Then she climbed under the extra blanket, listening to the storm move over the roof. Real bobcats out there, she thought, somewhere in the dark, ears pricked, muscles tensed, doing what they'd always done, long before appraisers and auctions and moral stories about what we call valuable. At some point, the steady rush of wind pulled her into sleep. When she woke, it was to silence. Not the ordinary morning quiet, but a thick, insulated hush. The kind that tells you snow did more than just dust the ground. It settled in and decided to stay. For a moment, she lay there, disoriented, remembering other mornings like this. The hospital phone call. The day after the funeral. The days when grief felt heavy enough to pin her to the mattress. She shook it off, swung her legs over the side of the bed, and slid her feet into cold slippers. The house felt cooler than it should. The furnace must have cycled off, or the power. In the kitchen, the digital clock on the stove blinked 12 o'clock. The furnace was silent. The refrigerator hummed, so at least the electricity was back. But something had definitely gone wrong during the night. She filled the kettle, set it on the gas burner, and turned toward the living room as she always did, looking for the familiar outline by the window. The little table was there. The candle stub was there. The ring of dust was there. The bobcat was not. It took her brain a second to catch up. She blinked, squinted, stepped closer. Maybe it had fallen onto the floor. Maybe she'd moved it and forgotten. No, she wouldn't forget that. The table was bare, except for the candle and the faint circle where the base had sat. Her heart gave a hard physical jolt. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the complaint from bones not used to sudden movements. She looked under the table, under the nearby chair, behind the curtains. Nothing. The window latch above her head hung crooked, metal twisted. A small pile of snow had drifted onto the sill, half melted into a puddle on the wood. During the night, the wind had forced it open. She stood, breathing faster now. The storm's sounds from last night replayed in her mind. The scrapes, the rattles. Had the table been bumped? Had the statue fallen out into the snow? Had someone... She pushed that last thought away. First things first. She pulled on her coat, grabbed the first pair of boots she could find, and stepped out onto the front porch. The world was white and still. Snow banked up against the house in soft waves. Paths were erased, bushes were rounded. The sky was a clean, pale gray. Her breath puffed out in quick, visible bursts as she moved along the front of the house, boots plunging through the drift. She scanned the ground near the window, her eyes stinging from the brightness. Nothing. She circled the house, careful, looking for a dark shape against the snow. The bobcat statue was heavy, solid. If it had fallen, it would have left a mark. But all she saw were the smooth, wind-sculpted drifts and a few small, delicate tracks. Rabbit, maybe. Or something else that lived closer to the ground than she did. By the time she made it back to the front steps, her thighs ached and her hands were numb. Inside, the house felt colder now, and not just because of the temperature. Standing in the middle of her living room, surrounded by familiar furniture, she felt the same sick, floating sensation she'd had the day the funeral home took Thomas's body away and left the couch, the lamp, the throw blanket, all the props of normalcy behind. This shouldn't hurt as much as it does, she thought. It's just metal. But her emotions knew better. The little bronze guardian had become part of her daily rhythm, love in its quietest form. Tap the head, light the candle, sketch the lines. A heartwarming story written in tiny, repeated motions. Now that the thread was cut, old grief rushed in through the gap. She called Hazel first, her voice unsteady as she tried to explain.
The window blew open in the night, she said. The statue is gone. I've checked the yard. I don't see it anywhere.
Hazel didn't say, "It's just a thing." She said, "I'm coming over," and hung up. She called Dana at the rehab center next.
I know this sounds silly,
Eleanor began.
with everything you deal with there. It doesn't sound silly, Dana said. You lost something that mattered.
That's never silly. When the roads clear a bit, we'll keep an eye out. People pick up anything after a storm. It may show up at a pawn shop or a yard sale listing. I'll have Tyler check online too. He's quick with that stuff. By noon, the phone had become a lifeline. Harold called, having heard from Dana.
I remember what it's like when something goes missing right after a loss, he said. Feels like the universe is poking the bruise. You're not crazy for being upset.
The storm had knocked out more than a window latch. It had shaken loose layers of old sorrow. And everyone who knew even a small piece of Eleanor's story seemed to understand that. If you've been there, you know what this is like. A small new loss brushes against the scar of a bigger one, and suddenly you're grieving everything at once. The dog you had as a kid, the parent you sat with at the hospital, the way your house sounded when it was full. That's what woke up in Eleanor as she sat at her kitchen table that afternoon, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. Her emotions tangled. Anger at herself for not securing the latch, fear that someone had taken the statue, shame that she cared so much about an object when there was real suffering in the world. But beneath all that, something else stirred. A kind of stubbornness, a loyalty to what the bobcat had meant, not just to her, but to the story of Sienna, of Cedar, of all the unseen lives out on the hills.
This is not how your tale ends,
she said aloud, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Outside, the snow began to glitter as the clouds thinned. Somewhere under that white blanket was either a buried statue or a set of footprints that might lead to it. Somewhere out in town, people she hadn't known how to lean on before were already thinking of ways to help. In the next part of this inspirational story, that sense of not over yet will pull Eleanor into a bigger decision, one that asks her to choose between private comfort and shared purpose. The missing bobcat will become more than a lost object. It will become a turning point. For now, if you're willing, you might pause and remember a time when a small loss opened a larger ache. Maybe it was a misplaced ring, an empty chair, a song you couldn't make yourself play. Notice how you came through that season, the kindness you offered yourself or wish you had. That remembrance is its own quiet act of love, and it will make what happens next in Eleanor's story feel even closer to home. Sometimes the real turning point isn't when something appears in your life. It's when you decide what it's going to mean. 3 days after the storm, the snow began to give up its secrets. The plows had come through. Kids had built their snowmen. Tire tracks carved gray lines down the middle of the streets. In Eleanor's yard, the drifts slumped and shrank, revealing patches of brown grass and a few forgotten leaves. It was Tyler, who found the first clue. He'd been helping Dana check online listings to see if anyone had tried to sell a small bobcat statue in the area. When that turned up nothing, he started walking the neighborhood on his own, phone in hand, hat pulled low, scanning the edges of yards the way a tracking dog might. On the third afternoon, he spotted a curious mark along the alley behind Eleanor's house. A long, shallow groove in the snow where something heavy had slid, ending at a bare patch of earth. Beyond it, on top of a cinder block by a trash can, sat the statue. It was dusted with ice and clumps of snow, a little scratched along one ear, but unmistakable. The bronze bobcat, front paw raised, gaze steady as if it had simply jumped down from the window table and wandered outside to see what the storm was about. Tyler scooped it up carefully, snapped a quick photo, and sent it to Dana with 2 words. Found him. When Eleanor opened her front door to their knock and saw that familiar silhouette in Dana's arms, her knees almost buckled with relief. Emotions rose too fast for words. Shock, gratitude, anger at the storm, tenderness for these people who had searched as if the statue were a missing family member. She took the bobcat with both hands, pressing it briefly against her chest like you might hold a small, shivering animal, then set it gently back on the table by the window. The ring of dust fitted perfectly, as if it had never left. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just stood together in that small front room, letting the happiness of this tiny reunion soak in. It wasn't the kind of happy you shout about. It was quieter, soulful, like the first warm breeze after a long, hard winter. Later, when the excitement settled, the bigger question returned. Graham came by a few days after hearing the statue had been found. He sat at the kitchen table with a folder of paperwork and an expression that tried to balance professional calm with genuine care. "My client is still very interested," he said. "The offer stands, $50,000. I can handle the logistics. You wouldn't have to travel or deal with any of it. The money would be wired straight to you." He listed what that sum could mean: home repairs, a medical cushion, a little travel if she wanted it. It all sounded reasonable, practical, loyal to the part of her that worried. Eleanor listened. She thought about cold nights and the old furnace, about her car's stubborn rattle, about her daughter's invitations to come visit the grandkids and the way she always answered, "Maybe next year." Then she looked at the bobcat on the table. In her mind, it wasn't just bronze anymore. It was Sienna's stalking shape on the hillside. It was Cedar pacing the rehab pen. It was the countless unseen bobcats living their secret fairy tale lives in the rocks above town. It was Harold folding towels, Tyler searching alleys, Hazel's steady kindness, Dana's daily work with broken wings and bruised paws. It was the reason she had started drawing again. The reason her house felt a little less empty. The reason she'd allowed herself to hum along with the radio once or twice without feeling guilty. How do you put a price on that? She thought, then answered herself, honest and clear. You don't. Not exactly. But you can decide what to do with the price someone else puts on it. A few nights earlier, after the statue came home, she'd had coffee with Hazel and Dana at the rehab center. They sat at a table near the education room, surrounded by posters of local wildlife and photos of release days. "What if," Hazel had said slowly, "this little cat doesn't belong to just one living room anymore?" They began to imagine it together. The bobcat in a glass case at the community center, where children on field trips could see it and learn about the real animals in their own hills. A plaque telling Sienna's story and Cedar's, and the way kindness travels from one generation to the next. Prints of Eleanor's sketches sold to support the rehab center and free art classes for seniors who, like her, had set their creativity aside until later. A guardian, not just for one quiet house, but for a whole town. Now, sitting across from Graham with his neat stack of forms, Eleanor felt that idea settle into place, like a final puzzle piece. "I've thought about your offer," she said, "and about what this statue has brought into my life. The love, the loyalty, the second chances. I can't pretend that $50,000 wouldn't help. It would, a lot. But," She glanced toward the window where the hills sat in the distance, steady as always.
"But I don't want this to be just a private treasure," she went on. "It came to me through other people's stories.
I'd like it to go on telling stories, not just sitting in a vault." Graham listened, hands folded, respectful. "So here's what I'd like to propose," she said. "You represent the sale, just as you planned. Your client buys the bobcat, but instead of taking it away to some private collection, they agree to place it on permanent loan to our community center. A kind of bobcat guardian for everyone. In return, I'll accept the full offer and share it." She slid a piece of paper across the table. It held a simple breakdown in her careful handwriting. A portion to high desert wildlife care. Enough to build a sturdier bobcat enclosure, fund medical care, and pay staff more than bare bones wages. A portion of the community center, earmarked for art and nature programs, is especially for older adults who thought their creative days were behind them. A portion set aside to fix her furnace and her car. Not a luxury, just choosing not to be cold, not to be stranded. And a small cushion for emergencies. Because, as she put it, kindness doesn't cancel out the need for common sense. Graham read the list slowly. When he looked up, there was something new in his eyes. Not just the satisfaction of a good deal, but a kind of quiet respect. "You're turning an appraisal into a moral story," he said with a soft smile. "From what is this worth to what can this do?" She shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It's the only way it makes sense to me." In the end, his client agreed. They liked the idea, actually. It gave their purchase a kind of meaning money alone couldn't provide. The contracts were signed, the wires were arranged, and just like that, a statue once priced at 20 cents became the cornerstone of something much bigger than itself. On the day the bobcat was moved to its new home, the community center staff cleared a spot near the entrance. A glass case was installed, nothing flashy, just sturdy and clear. Eleanor helped position the statue inside, turning it so that its raised paw faced toward the large windows, as if it were listening to the wind outside. She slid her hand along the glass where its back would be, feeling a strange blend of loss and fulfillment. It wouldn't be the first thing she saw every morning in her own living room anymore. But now, dozens of people would see it every day. Children, elders, tired parents, volunteers heading to meetings. Folks are looking for a warm place to sit for an hour. It wasn't hers alone now. It was theirs. This is the pivot that changes the tone of our inspirational story. The bobcat stops being just a comfort object and becomes a kind of teacher. About how love can grow larger circles. About how loyalty to our own healing can spill over into kindness for others. About how something as simple as a small statue can invite a whole town into a heartwarming story they didn't know they needed. If you're listening and thinking about something in your own life, a talent, a keepsake, a bit of savings, that has been purely private until now, you might gently ask yourself, is there a way this could watch over more than just me? Not as a burden, not as a demand, just as a possibility. In the final part of this tale, we'll step into the first Bobcat Day at that community center. Watch how this little guardian quietly reshapes a town, and see what it means for Eleanor to sit in a room full of people and realize she is no longer just surviving, but truly, quietly, happy. For now, maybe place a hand over your heart for a moment. Feel that steady rhythm. That's where these kinds of choices begin, not in the numbers, but in the small, brave corners of your own soulful human story. By the time the first Bobcat Day arrived, it felt less like an event on the calendar and more like a quiet promise the town had made to itself. The community center smelled faintly of coffee, winter coats, and fresh photocopies. In the front hall, under soft, steady lights, the bronze bobcat stood in its glass case. The plaque beneath it told a simple version of the story. A sculptor, a real wild cat, a forgotten statue in a thrift store, a widow in the desert, and the choice to turn private comfort into shared kindness. People drifted in slowly at first, a grandfather with 2 grandchildren in tow, a nurse just off the night shift, a retired truck driver who'd seen the flyer at the post office. They paused in front of the case, the way you pause at a window with a good view. Some leaned in, reading every line of the plaque. Others just stood with their hands in their pockets, eyes on the bobcat's raised paw and listening posture. On one side of the hall, volunteers from the Wildlife Rehab Center had set up a table with photos of animals they'd helped. A young bobcat stretching inside an enclosure, a hawk spreading its wings in a test flight, a coyote trotting away at release, tail high. Each picture was paired with a small note. Hit by car, poisoned by rat bait, snared in fence, and below, now healed, back home. Nearby, another table was covered in paper and colored pencils. Children sat, tongues between their teeth in careful concentration, drawing their own bobcats. Some realistic, some with crowns and capes, little fairy tales of wild royalty. Their parents watched, a little amused, a little moved, seeing how naturally kids turned animals into heroes. In a side room, a small group of older adults gathered around a table with sketchbooks open, listening as an art teacher gently encouraged them. "Don't worry about getting it perfect," he said. "Just notice what you feel when you look at the lines of that body, the strength in it. Let your hand follow that feeling." Every so often, someone would glance through the doorway toward the statue, as if checking in with a patient, silent friend. And in the middle of it all, sitting on a folding chair near the back of the hall, was Eleanor. She held a paper cup of coffee between her palms and watched her town move around her like a slow, kind river. There was no banner with her name on it, no speeches about her sacrifice. People understood, in that wordless way communities do, that this wasn't really about one person's generosity. It was about what everyone chose to do with the story. Still, she couldn't help feeling the strange warmth of seeing her private struggle turned into something heartwarming and shared. The bobcat that had kept her company during lonely nights had become a small symbol of loyalty and love for a whole room full of strangers. She noticed Harold sitting by the rehab table, carefully explaining to a young woman how sponsoring an animal worked. No pets allowed where he lived, but his face glowed when he talked about his red-tailed hawk. She watched Tyler show a group of teens how to follow the rehab center on their phones, his enthusiasm bridging the gap between screens and living creatures. She saw a little boy press his hand against the glass, whispering, "Thank you," to a statue he clearly considered a kind of guardian. At one point, a woman about Eleanor's age sat down beside her. She looked at the bobcat for a while before speaking. "My husband died 2 years ago," she said quietly. "I thought my story was pretty much over. Then I read about this, about you, in the paper." She laughed softly. "I came here today to see if it's really true that something as small as a statue can help someone remember how to be happy again." Eleanor didn't give a polished answer. She just nodded. "It didn't fix everything," she said. "Grief still wakes up some mornings. But this little cat," she gestured toward the case, "opened a door. It led me to people, to animals, to this." She spread her hands slightly, taking in the room. Sometimes that's all an inspirational story really is. Not a miracle, just a door. That's the quiet miracle that Bobcat Day carried. It showed people that you don't have to be fearless or wealthy or young to do something that matters. You can be tired. You can be grieving. You can be living on a budget and still find ways to offer kindness, to extend a hand to other souls, human and wild, who are trying to heal. This wasn't about a rare piece of art anymore. It was about love, about the deep emotions that tie us to the places and creatures around us. It was about moral stories that don't shout but stay with you when you're washing dishes that night or taking your own slow walk around the block. As the afternoon light slanted through the community center windows, the staff dimmed the overheads for a moment. Everyone in the hall was handed a small battery candle. Dana said a few words about the animals they'd lost that year and the ones they'd saved. Then she invited people to hold a brief silence for every living being in their town that went mostly unseen. Bobcats, owls, stray dogs, and also quiet neighbors, widows, caregivers, folks who rarely ask for help but need it all the same. The room fell still. Dozens of tiny lights flickered, reflected faintly in the glass around the statue. In that hush, Eleanor felt something ease inside her. It wasn't that the grief was gone. It was that it finally had company. Her story, with all its rugged edges, had become one thread in a bigger tapestry of heartwarming stories. There was a kind of fairness in that, a sense that the world, while not always gentle, could still be made kinder by ordinary people choosing loyalty to one another, to wildlife, to their own wounded hearts. That's the fresh perspective hiding in this simple fairy tale about a bobcat statue priced at 20 cents and a wildlife appraiser's $50,000 offer. It reminds us that value isn't just a number, it's the ripples a choice creates. A statue in one living room can comfort one person. A statue shared can inspire art classes, fund medical care for injured bobcats and hawks, and convince someone in the back row that their own second chance is still possible. So as we bring this inspirational story to a close, I'd like to gently turn the lens back toward you. Is there a bobcat in your life? Maybe not a statue, but something small that helped you through a hard season. A pet who sat by your side, a daily walk under the same old trees, a hobby you picked up when everything else fell apart. How has it quietly guarded you? And is there any way, even a modest one, that you could let the kindness you received flow out toward someone or some animal else? If this journey with Eleanor and her bronze guardian has stirred something in, I'd invite you to stay with that feeling for a moment. Take a breath. Notice what part of the story stayed with you the most. That's usually where your own heart is trying to speak. And if you'd like more soulful, gentle moral stories like this, more heartwarming stories of bobcats, wild creatures, and the way love and loyalty can change ordinary lives, I'd be honored if you'd tap like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next tale. It helps this little corner of the internet remain a place of calm and connection. And if you feel moved to go one step further, you can use Super Thanks or look for the donate links we share to support real-life rescues and rehab centers that care for wild animals like bobcats. Even a small gift can help buy food, medicine, or a safe enclosure for a hurt animal trying to find its way back home. Thank you for listening with your whole heart today.